Okay, so first thing I'm going to go over is kind of a brief introduction to Unreal Engine for folks who haven't actually opened up Unreal Engine before. So when you first open up the Unreal Engine launcher, it's going to show up like this. You'd go to your library, you would set up your engine versions. So here we have 4.26.2, which will be the engine we'll be using the entire time. Once you hit launch, you'll be brought up with something like this where you would either want to go on a recent project or start or create a new project. So in our case, we're going to be doing games. So we hit next after we select it, and then you can choose a template. Easiest one for me is starting off with a third person template. And then if you want to, you can change things like turning on ray tracing, which we're not going to do that. That's going to really slow things down. Start off with certain blueprint projects, the type of quality. Of course, in games, we want to have the coolest, most maximum quality, so we have that set. You can even choose what type of target you want to do. If you want to do mobile or tablet or desktop, you can already have it preset. In our case, we're going to be doing desktop console. And then it also comes with out of the box some basic starter content, which is just some materials and geometry. So I'd say let's start off with some starter content. Okay, so what you're going to do next is down here you have this directory location. This is where it's going to generate and save off all the files that you're going to need. So what you'll do is you'll click here. I already have a CGMA UE4 folder already. I'm going to right click on a new one, and then I'm just going to put this as test, if I can actually spell it. Okay, we'll have test right here. You select the folder, and then it's going to make and generate everything in this test folder. Here you can change your project name, so I'll just leave it as my project. You'll hit create. And then if you want to, we'll go into our file explorer. And let's see, in our UE4 directory, here it is. So once you go in here, it'll say my project, and then it'll have everything. This will be our Unreal Engine project file. So when you're submitting everything, you'll submit this my project file. If you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself, you can always just send the whole folder for me, whichever is best. But in the end, I want the folder that contains all this stuff. So right now it's trying to generate all of our files. It's going to take a little bit of time. So here we are at 91%. Sometimes it might take a little bit of time. So if you want to, go grab something to drink or go to the bathroom and then come back and should be open. Okay, so when you first load up, you'll get this scene. This is your default third-person example map. It's very simple, very easy. If you want to, you can press play and it will be completely playable as a third-person character. So this is what Unreal Engine looks like. On your side, you'll have your tabs for actors, your geometry, triggers, volumes, VFX, lighting, and other cinematic stuff. But we won't be going too crazy into this. This will be more for when you take environment or character classes and they'll go further along in it. Here is the level outliner. It'll break down exactly what is in the level at the time. We have two of these menus down here. One is details. So if I select an object, it will show me our transformation information. What is the actual static or 3D mesh, and then the material that is currently selected. And then you have other things like physics, collision, lighting, and other rendering options. In this second one, we have our world settings. So this is for, in general, the level itself. Here we have the light mass, which handles how if we bake or prep our lighting, this is the information you would change. So in our world settings, you'll have this light mass setting option. I would not try to change any of it because when you hit builds, it will try and compute your shadows and highlights for everything in the level. And sometimes if you change this, it will cause the light build to take minutes, if not hours, to build. So we try to leave that as simple as we can because we're not going to be doing lighting. We're not going to be doing any crazy rendering. We're just going to be doing shaders and materials. Down here is our content browser. So in that folder structure I was showing you earlier, this is the same folder structure. There'll be a content folder, and if you go in here, will all be U assets. Unreal Engine, what it does is it will convert your textures, your 3D models, anything else into its own file structure. That way people can't just rip files from a game that's published in Unreal Engine. What it also does is it will compute and process it better so that instead of it having to call an object from that original directory, it has it already inside of itself, so it helps with performance. So you have your normal structures in here. So here in the starter content, you have your materials, particles, props, shapes, textures. Everything's all laid out this way. Here we have our maps. In Unreal Engine, you can actually save off files of levels. So say if you want to start completely fresh, you can do new level. It gives you different options. You have an empty level that has no lighting in it. VR basics if you're doing virtual reality. Time of day with this new component that they have that allows you to do time of day transitions. And then default, which is just basic lighting, basic sky, basic player start, basic everything. But we're not using any of that stuff. So we'll just go back to our starter map. So up here, you're going to have different things. This is your save current. So save currently what level you are in. This is source control. So if you're using something like Perforce or any other type of source control system that handles iterations and changes, you can set up here. You have your modes for landscape, foliage, BSP, and mesh painting, like for vertex painting later on. You can handle that there. This is your shortcut to the content browser. This is your shortcut to the Unreal Engine Marketplace, where you can download and add assets in. This is our overall settings tab. Here you can adjust things for your viewport or snapping to grids. You can also handle the world and project settings, like you said down here. There's also your plugins as well. Here you can adjust the actual scalability. So by default, we have everything set to cinematic, but you can also change things down to high, low, medium, and it will adjust your render settings as well. So in our case, I want it to be cinematic. I want it to look cool. You can also change your material quality level. So we'll put this to epic. That way it doesn't try to curtail anything for performance at this time, though when you do get in a production standpoint, you will have to cut back on some things. Here we have our blueprint settings, but we will not go further into that because blueprints are complicated. Cinematic, so if you are doing a cinematic scene where you have the camera moving, the player talking, cutscenes like that, it will be handled through here. Build setting, here you can control and handle your light building, LODs, texture streaming, virtual textures, all that stuff. You can handle that there. The play button, that's simple, just play the game. You can change how it plays, either in its own little standalone game, simulate, which will simulate stuff in this little menu. Select the viewport will also play through here too. You can also launch. Basically, it will actually create its own little iteration of the game and play through whichever device. If you have an iPhone connected, it will actually play the iPhone through there. So say if we hit play, here we have our mannequin or Manny. You can walk around with WASD like every other video game. Hit spacebar to jump. Simple stuff. If you really want to get in the feel of making video games, just go through here. You can create your assets, bring them in, hit save, build the lighting, and then after lighting's done, just hit play. And then if you want to be done with this, you hit escape. So some simple shortcuts to note is to move around, you use the left mouse button to just kind of float around like this. If you want to rotate the camera a bit, you use the right mouse button to kind of rotate the camera around. The middle scroll button to zoom in and out. For moving the actual camera itself without having this weird float, you would use the WASD buttons, but you have to be clicking into the mouse. So if you right click and you use the A button, you move to the left, D button, you move to the right, W button to move forward, S button to move up. You can also use the Q button to go down and E button to go up. It's just like if you're playing a first-person shooter game or any other game that uses the simple WASD functions. Sometimes you'll see things like this. This is collision. In other features, you'll see these little icons. These are in what you would call the non-game mode. If you want to just see what you'll see in game, you hit the G button and it'll hide all that stuff. If you want to see it again, you just hit G again. And here you'll see all the little icons. You'll see where you keep your lights, reflection probes, collision, cameras, everything. Okay, so I told you about how to move around and move the camera around. Now I want to show you some quick little how to do movement, rotation, scale on any object. So if you select anything in this scene, like say this rounded cube, if you want to move something, you use W. If you want to scale something, you press E. Or no, if you want to rotate something, you press E. And if you want to scale something, you press R. And it should bring up the widgets to actually control these things. So let's go back to W. You'll have your 3-pointed gizmo to show your X, your Y, and your Z. Thing to note is that Unreal Engine is a Z up engine. So this is Z, this is X, and this is Y. Actually, no, this is Z, this is X, and this is Y. Sorry, they color-coded just so you know. So you can move this around. You hit E, you do your rotations, and then hit E or hit R, and you can do your rotations. If you want to, you can actually select the gadget so that you can either scale in one of two directions, or one direction, or all three directions at the same time. The thing you're going to see is that it's kind of snapping right now, and that's because right here are some other little widgets to know. This is to show grid snapping, so if you don't want to be snapping to a grid, you just turn that off. This is your position grid snapping, so it will actually snap it in increments of 10, 5, or 1. So you'll see that here's 1. Here is, say, 10. It's gone a little bit slower. Here is 5,000. You don't really notice it until you actually turn on snapping, though. So see, he's not moving even though I'm dragging it because he's not going to snap till he gets to the first 1,000th. Here's 50. This is 50 units. So 1 unit inside of Unreal Engine is actually 1 meter. So this guy, so let's say move him again, hit 5, hit 10,000, watch. Here's snapping. So a single Unreal Engine unit is 1 centimeter. So that's the reason why it's not moving right now. But let's unclick this. Let's go back to 1. You can also do angle snapping. So you can do it to, it will rotate every 10 degrees. You can also do 5 degrees. And then here are some divisions of 360. So you can do 22.5, 11, 5.6, 2.8, if you want to get the most out of your rotations as much as possible. Same thing with your scaling snaps. So you can turn this off, and then you can actually change your scaling snaps to things out of besides 1. And then right here is your camera speed. So right now you can see how it moves pretty decent for this small scale, but maybe it's a little too fast. So you can actually scale it down, and it actually slowly now moves in. Maybe it's like a little too slow, so you can bring it up to 6. So it's actually really fast. I kind of like to keep it around like 3, 4, or 5, just because it's not as bad. Only unless I'm doing something in a very, very big level is when it actually will like move around. But yeah, that's how you handle rotation, moving, scaling. W if you're going to move something, E for rotation, and R for scale. Here is your different type of viewport options. So you can always do bottom, top, perspective. You can even change the rendering viewpoint. So here is your lit mode with how the camera looks and everything. Unlit, which just basically turns off all lighting. You'll just see just the color and stuff. wireframe, detail lighting, which basically right now you won't see much of a difference because there's no color on any of these assets, but detail lighting for when you want to just see how the lighting is handled without having any extra color. So you'll see how shadows are handled, highlights are handled, just it's almost like a simple grayscale view of the lighting. Reflections, if you want to see how the reflections look inside the level, how the probes build them. Here's some optimization view modes. Light complexity, how many lights are actually in the level. So right now it's blue because there's really only 2 lights. You have also shader complexity, which we don't really have any shaders in here, so it's not going to be as complex. But when you start bringing in things like glass and foliage, you'll start to see it's going to go from green to red to white, which having something white is not good. But we'll go over more of these once we start really working on some performance heavy stuff. There's also things like material scale, tells you if a texture is oversized. We also have light map density, which is my favorite. Light map density shows you if you're using light maps, if it's too big or too small to the actual scale of the object. So here it's green, which means it's good. But if we start scaling it up, you'll start to see it's turning blue because the light maps are too small. And if you start scaling it down, it's slowly starting to turn orange. And then a little bit further, it turns red because the light maps are too big. And then we have buffer visualizations, which buffer visualizations are, in a sense, render passes. So you can look at specific things like base color. So this is different from the actual unlit. Unlit just turns off all lighting, and you'll see specular color, base color, everything else mixed together. This base color will only show you what's the albedo color of the material itself. You can also go into metallic, showing the actual metallic values of certain objects. Like here, we only have metallic in just the joints and other little highlight areas, because that's where the metal is on Manny. Same thing for roughness. World normal, which shows your normal maps. Things like ambient occlusion are going to be handled a little differently, because Manny does have a ambient occlusion map. He does not, these other things do not have ambient occlusion maps. This is actually generated from the light mass options. And then we'll just go back to our lit mode and just see how everything is in game. Sometimes when you're playing around, you'll see this thing, lighting needs to be rebuilt. This just means that something was moved, and you'll see actually I moved this guy. It looks completely different from how the shadows were baked before. So we hit build. It's going to take a little bit of time. Sometimes it might chug your computer a little bit. So right now, it's going in and it's going to see what options we already have set up for this mesh. And then it will just bake down how we have the shadow set up. So everything looks better. It's going to take, sometimes it may give off these other weird little artifacts. It's just because sometimes Unreal Engine is still processing it. Because what it's doing is it's creating another texture map called a light map. And light maps just handle where shadows are placed. And then if you want to hit everything, hit save. And then boom. And that's kind of a very, very quick and dirty overview of Unreal Engine.